So let's start with Keon Coleman, because obviously very polarizing when you're talking the receiving end of things. As a run blocker, he might be the best blocker in class, and he's got the size to do that. And I said in the video I did the other day that I think he can make an impact immediately in that department, and maybe even more so than Gabe, to be honest with you, because he's got a different mentality and way of playing, and he takes things personally, and you can see it on the field, right? You can see him, pancaking guys and just throwing guys, even if the run's not coming to his side. So, but if we're talking receiving, the thing that always comes up with him is his inability to separate. And so I want to start there, because I feel like, we do a lot of scouting type stuff, and this is the type of year and time of year that we kind of need to break these things down a little bit, especially in the lull of the offseason, that you can separate in multitude of ways, right, Anthony?
Yeah, I mean, we spoke about this, two draft cycles ago with Drake London, who was partial comp for Keon Coleman.
That's right.
Yeah, and what was it was a mix of Drake London and Dontavian Wicks is who our comp was for Keon Coleman. And similar to the conversation with Drake London, although Drake London was a far better route runner coming out of college than Keon Coleman.
I had higher grade on him.
Absolutely. He was my wide receiver 2 behind Garrett Wilson.
Yeah.
And wide receiver 1, actually, for a lot of people. You look at Coleman, and there are those parallels with London, because, London didn't run the 40, but people thought he would run it slow, which is why he didn't. And then you see the 40 time for Keon Coleman at the combine, which we're going to talk about, and whether that may or may not be a little misleading. But yeah, you see that separation piece in the stems or lack thereof.
Right.
But what London would do was separate at that catch point, high point the football and go up and get it, or, use an arm or extend a little bit and be able to catch something off frame.
Go back to the film room we did, right? That comp film room for London and Keon Coleman, because we had several plays from Drake London, highlighting that catch point ability. And you're going to see some of that tonight in the film room as well.
Absolutely. And that's what Keon Coleman's calling card is. Now, percentage-wise, for it to be his calling card, it wasn't as good in 2023 as it was in 2022, which concerns you a little bit.
Yeah.
But that is 100% a separation piece, and something we've talked about on the show, and we're not just saying it because the Bills took Keon Coleman. We're trying to, soften the blow. But that's a legitimate piece. You can separate at the line. You can separate in the stem. You can separate in the break. You can separate at the catch point. There are a variety of ways to do it. He doesn't do it in the traditional fashion that we've seen Bills receivers do, like the Stephon Diggses and Cole Beasleys and even Dalton Kincaids of the world. But that's because he has a different play style, a different athletic profile, and he separates more at the catch point, and that's how he gets his wins as of now.
Yeah, and so, as you said, there are different phases of a route. All right, first of all, I learned this from Rob Moore, who played for the Jets, and he also coached under Doug Marrone at Syracuse in years back. And I remember going to the Turning Stone Casino in Syracuse for a coaching clinic, and Doug Marrone and his entire staff was there. And Rob Moore was a wide receiver coach at the time, obviously a really solid veteran receiver in the NFL. And he taught us in that clinic about the different phases of a route for, the average fan. And obviously you're at the line of scrimmage right off the snap. That's your release phase. You release an outside. What type of pace or tempo are you using? You have the drive phases when they're starting to work upfield. They're trying to get the depth. And that's right before the break. Obviously, there's a break phase. And so the fourth is the catch phase. And so there are, generally 4 phases of a route. And at each of those stops along the way for one route stem, you can separate. Obviously, if you're being pressed, you have a big wide receiver like Keon Coleman, and they try to jam him at the line of scrimmage. He can create separation one of 2 ways, with speed and elusiveness and getting off that jam, or use his power, his strength, his size to create that separation to release. So at each phase, at each segment, you can create separation. Now, as you said, does Keon have issues separating with his speed? Yeah, I would say he does, especially when you're talking working vertically down the field. If that corner is able to open up in transition and run, he's going to run with him more times than not. Now, when you're talking about Coleman and how does he separate? More times than not, at any of those stops in a route, he's going to use his strength, his physicality, and his frame, and that's how he separates. So the one thing I want to hammer home tonight is for Coleman and for big-bodied receivers, a lot of these guys can separate, but it's just a different type of separation. And honestly, it's probably not one that really meshes well with Josh or hasn't meshed well with Josh. And I think that's been the major talking point. And I understand people are saying, well, maybe because he's never really had that. And I get that. But, you watch the games, you guys watch the film. Josh and the offense was humming with separators. That offense is not going to hum throwing 50-50 balls and jump balls to an above the rim player. You just can't live in that world because people and corners and safeties at the NFL level are 10 times better, and defenses and schemes are 10 times better than what you're seeing in college.
And even if you do have somebody who is a tremendous contested catch guy or great 50-50 ball guy, that's still a hard way to live. Like, there's a reason it's called a 50-50 ball. Like, because if it's off just in the slightest way, and I've seen this, used for Keon Coleman a bunch, which is, it is true to a degree. Like, oh, well, his quarterback at Florida State was putting him into bad situations and throwing the ball up in areas that made it hard for him to come down with the ball. And that is true. But also, if that's your calling card, it kind of doesn't matter. You still got to make the shot. That's like being like, well, he's a really great 3-point shooter, but defenders are getting their hand in his face. So what?
Right.
If you're only a 3-point guy, you got to make the 3-point shots. And seeing that, and then also tying that into this offense, I wanted a ball winner and a contested catch guy in this lineup for years to round out the wide receiver room. But I wanted it like in conjunction with Stephon Diggs and Cole Beasley and Dalton Kincaid. So it was like another element added in. Now knowing, and you and I were talking about this on Friday night, once he got drafted, getting Keon Coleman here and the level, I think, of expectation of where he was taken and what this room looks like he looks to be a major contributor to this offense. And knowing that he's not in that traditional mold that Allen has succeeded with doesn't mean it can't happen. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Yeah. But, and I said it last night on Disguised Coverage, I'm very much like a known quantity guy. I want to know this works. Now, Allen and Keon Coleman might be absolutely amazing, but I know Allen to Diggs was amazing. Allen to Cole Beasley was amazing. Allen to that type of archetype, what that looks like. Right. I don't necessarily know what this one looks like. And that's really my bigger question or what still is my biggest question more than anything, because I like Coleman as a player in a vacuum. The fit with the Bills offense and with Josh Allen in particular is what gave me pause or cause for concern here.
Right. And, a lot of people point to the contested catches. And yes, it was, just a tad over 33% last year against Florida State. But, when I was doing the research for that feature I did on him, one of the quotes from the head coach of Duke really caught my attention. And so listen to this quote. He says, in this game, this was after the game, he says, certainly you go into the game and you see what Keon Coleman is doing and what Johnny Wilson is doing and what the skill kids are doing on the outside. And that certainly draws a lot of attention. And that right there caught my attention because you saw it every single week when you watch this player, Keon Coleman, because a lot of those plays down the field, especially those contested catches, were just the quarterback, regardless of it was the starter or the backup, was just throwing it up down the field.
Throwing and praying.
Yeah, they did what almost like a lot of what we saw from the Bills last year. A lot of passes were outside the numbers. Everything was outside until they got Dalton Kincaid going and Shakir going, mid to late in the year. And so defenses knew this. The head coach knew it. You don't think players knew this? And they played Johnny Wilson a little differently. They played Keon Coleman a little differently. Absolutely. And so you see a lot of these contested catches. Again, 30 opportunities last year, and Coleman only caught 10. And a lot of those, it's not that he wasn't just bringing them down. A lot of those were contested. And they're actually broken up. If you watch the film, a lot of those were PBUs. And so, again, the coach knew it. The players knew it. They did stuff schematically to keep those receivers, those big body receivers on the outside. Hey, they want to run 50-50 balls all day? We'll let them do that. And that's why we are worried. That's why we have concerns, because you can't win like that at the NFL consistently. Here and there, absolutely. And I think the Bills will have those opportunities, especially if we're talking those plays down the field that we profiled Josh missing, him trying to float it and use touch, 40 yards downfield. Maybe this changes the type of throw and trajectory that Josh uses. Instead of throwing it like that, maybe he throws it flat, and now he can have the above the rim player from time to time Coleman go up and get it.
And so to your point with that contested catch piece, so 33.3% in 2023 at Florida State. The year before, and so for the numbers, he was 10 of 30 contested catches in terms of versus opportunities. At Florida State the year before, he was 10 of 16
Michigan
for
State,
contested.
right?
I'm sorry,
Right.
Michigan State the year before. Sorry, I got so many states in my head. So Florida State in 2023 catch percentage of 33.3% contested. The year before at Michigan State, contested catch percentage of 62.5%. And so it's not like his ability to win in that way fell off at Florida State. It just, the difference for me really highlights, like we're saying, how hard it is to consistently live that way from a contested catch standpoint. If you're playing a corner with length, if the wind isn't great, if the ball is 30 yards downfield, he's got all these targets, like you're saying, that are above 20 yards, and it's just chucking and hoping and praying, and he's got to get positioning at the last minute. And it's just a very temperamental way to succeed, where it's literally kind of like the swing of a pendulum. And even if you are a dude like T. Higgins, who can take a 50-50 ball and make it 80-20, it's a hard way to live consistently. Keon Coleman is a good contested catch guy, but the difference in those numbers from the 2022 Michigan State year to the 2023 Florida State year, I find them so interesting, because he's still going up in the same way. He's just not coming down with them. And that's not because he all of a sudden became crappy at that aspect of the game. It's just because that's hard. It's a hard thing to do all the time.
And I had Andrew Stasel. He works for True Media, and he's also, a consultant with us when it comes to analytics. And I had him look up the past 2 years. And again, the numbers are a little different when you're talking percentages, but listen to these contested catch numbers for Keon Coleman and some of the other guys in this class. So Keon Coleman in 2022 and 2023 had an average of 44% contested catch rate. Jalen Polk had a 51%. AD Mitchell had 41%. So actually Coleman was higher than AD Mitchell over a 2-year span. Brian Thomas Jr., 48%. So he was 4% higher than Coleman. And then Xavier Legette was at 42%. So just gives you an idea, like he was on opposite ends of the spectrum, no doubt. Michigan State to Florida State. But again, as I profile, like a lot of that had to do with the scheme. And a lot of that had to do with the quarterback.
It was ugly at Florida State. And you wouldn't expect that going from Michigan State to Florida State and having like a worse situation. It was ugly.
Right. And someone posted in here in the chat room about, here, let me bring it up. Charles said, what type of route tree do you think Brady gives Coleman in year one? And this kind of sparked, something for me. A thought for me is that I do think that they're going to try to get him those goes. They're going to get him those curls or stop routes, those 50-50 back shoulder balls that Allen and Diggs were money on in 2022. Just think about that. Even early in the year against Ramsey, Diggs just smoking him, throwing him by. Like Coleman can do that. He can do that. Again, we just have to find out if, when he plays against higher profile corners, if he can do that, because that hasn't really been seen all too much. I know you posted some reps against Deonte Banks, who obviously was a first round pick. I do have to see if he can do that consistently. And of course, he's got time. He's young. That's going to take some time. But I just think that, like, you have to take that context into account. The scheme, what they're asking of Coleman. It was a lot different in that Florida State offense than at Michigan State.
Yeah, and I not even almost, like, I liked the Michigan State stuff, like, better than the Florida State stuff. Like, the routes he was running, even some of his movement. Also at times, and I don't think this is correct, but I felt like he looked lighter, to the point that I looked up his height and weight. I was like, is he like 5 to 10 pounds lighter here? But he was the same height and weight listed, at least at Michigan State, that he was at Florida State. And yeah, just, it really wasn't an ideal situation. But you see the athleticism, you see the size, and that's a piece I wanted to talk about quickly and share my screen here. Because, we've talked about it so much on Twitter. People are talking about it, is he slow, yada, yada, all these pieces. Yeah. And do you see it? Is it not sharing?
Let me see here.
There we go. Okay, cool. So these are some next-gen stats, some miles per hour numbers for Keon Coleman from the NFL Combine, the same Combine where he ran a 4.61 and was very slow, yada, yada. So, and you see it right there from next-gen, despite registering the slowest speed of any receiver in his group that was tracked during the 40, Keon Coleman showed off his game speed while running routes. And then you see what he has there. So there's the 40 time for miles per hour and where it ranked in his group, 15th. But look at his miles per hour on a slant, 19.45. That was third. Miles per hour on a dagger, 18.10. That was fourth. Miles per hour on a go, 21.71, which was tied for second. And then 18.47 on a slot strike, which was second. He, at that combine, and it was talked about then, especially with the gauntlet, he played much faster than his 40 time suggested. And I think even when you watch on tape, like, I didn't expect him to run a 4.6. I thought he'd run, I didn't think fast, like, because he's not a burner. I thought like maybe mid to low 4.5s, but he plays faster than 4.61 for me at least. And regardless of that, do not conflate the 40 time with him being unathletic or being this plotter. I can't tell me how many people have been like, oh, he's Kelvin Benjamin 2.0, same guy, because they're both from Florida State and big and slow. Don't conflate that one test, that straight line speed aspect, with who he is as a player, because there really is athleticism and agility to his game for being, in the 6'4", 213 pounds range. And, some of these next gen tracking pieces really show that and highlight it from the same combine where he ran the slow 40.
Right. And you're going to see some of that in the film room tonight. And it really opens up that conversation about time, speed. You heard Bean call it playing faster. So you got the 40 and all those drills and all those measurements at the combine and pro days, and you're stacking that information up against what you see on film or what the scouts saw in person, which is very important, as we see every year when we go down to the Senior Bowl.
Yeah.
It really brings that conversation of time speed versus play speed and game speed. And I will agree with Bean and everyone else. They've said it too. He plays faster than his actual time speed. I think that is kind of universally agreed. But there are certain situations where that time speed does matter more than play speed. If you're running a lot of go routes, it can matter. If you can get off the line and run by a guy because you're faster, that matters.
Brian Thomas.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That matters. But that's where we need to differentiate between that time speed and play speed. Play speed is, hey, you run this 40, slow or fast, whatever it is, but you have the mental processing side of things. You can read a coverage. You can read a leverage. You can, do all that while you're about to catch the ball, as you'll see in the film with Keon Coleman. Like, that is the combination. Play speed is a combination of that time speed, that suddenness, those the vertical, the broad, all those explosive drills, all of that paired up with mental processing and how you can ID things. And that's why you hear him, hear guys say, Coleman can play faster. And I just want people to understand that there is a big difference in certain situations. One is more important than the other, especially if you're talking a guy that really lives and dies by go routes and stop routes and curl routes. Those things do matter, but again, to a different degree, and how he's used within the offensive scheme.
And especially if you're in an offense that is trying to create space in the short and intermediate underneath for Dalton Kincaid or Khalil Shakir, maybe, Curtis Samuel, you'd like to have more of a field stretching presence potentially that isn't just like, well, he can get vertical and then we'll just throw him a goal ball and he'll win a contested catch piece. Beautiful. I was about to pull that up from White Towns King. So thank you very much, White Towns, for being here. Thank you very much for the super chat. And he shooting straight from the hip. White Towns says, is Keon going to fare better against Sauce Gardner than Diggs and Gabe? Ooh, what do you think?
I like that. That's a great question. And I do think he does fare better for many reasons. Diggs, obviously, he had a little more shake. He had a better release. But the long arms of Sauce gives a lot of wide receivers problems, right? Yeah. And especially the last couple of years, Diggs and really all the Bills receivers have struggled at times when not press, but jam and length. And so I do think that he does fare better, especially Gabe. I think he's overall a better prospect than Gabe was, especially coming out. I do think they share some of the same traits, but in most areas, I do think Keon is better, especially if we're talking athleticism, if we're talking, those, contested catches, going up and getting the ball. I said they're pretty similar in the run blocking angle, but I do think the ceiling is higher for Keon. But yeah, I do think it's a better matchup when you're talking about Sauce Gardner with his length, his ability to read concepts and routes. I'm excited about that matchup, to be honest.
And so that's a really, I love that question. And yeah, I kind of echo that. Sauce Gardner is, listed at 6'2", 3 1/4, 190 pounds, but he's in the 94th percentile for wingspan and the 96th percentile for arm length. And then you have Keon Coleman, who's 6'3 1/4, 213, 68th percentile for arm length, 55th percentile for arm length, 68th percentile for wingspan. I do like the idea of like, instead of matching like technique with technique of Sauce versus Diggs and having the length, disadvantage, I kind of like the idea of Keon Coleman just being like, yo, bro, just run through him. Just
He's
two-hand
got the
gangster release.
mentality too, right?
Yes,
He's got that alpha mentality.
just chuck him off the line. That the Brendan Rice gangster release that we saw at the
Yeah.
Senior Bowl. Just like, don't get cute and try and stab and shake or do any kind of hop at the line. You're bigger than him. You're stronger and thicker than he is. Bully him off the line. And that's also like, from a styles make fights, that's a really fun aspect to watch. Like the technique of Sauce Gardner versus like the potential bully ball idea
Right.
of what Keon Coleman could be. Yeah, there's some real fun options there, and that's a real like fun thing to consider, and it goes into the schematic conversation. Like, I feel like most people would see that and be like, oh well, Diggs and Gape, like it has to be that. But no, like this is where, again, like stylistically and from a size and frame standpoint, someone can match up better with a player. And I love that this is our first clip, because someone on Twitter who constantly comes and mentions negatively was like, oh, this is OPI and a push off. And it's not. And it's beautiful from Keon Coleman and gives some encouragement.
Yeah, let's get to some of this film, guys. That's why you're all here. So let's get to some of this film. Again, keep in mind the 4 different segments of a route where you can separate. Again, the release, the drive phase, the break phase, and the catch phase. All right. And just keep an eye on that. So again, does Keon Coleman have struggles and issues separating with speed and suddenness at times? Absolutely. But he does win with his strength and separation throughout a route stem. So you see him in the slot to the top of the screen here, and you see as he gets to the top of that route, you see him throw that guy off and break to the boundary and catch the ball there for the first down. And I love this play for several reasons. And one, they're bracketing him.
Mm-hmm.
They are bracketing him. You're going to see this corner take outside leverage. He has help inside. So they are bracketing him. That showed you the gravity that he has. Again, outside the hash, out on the boundary. They respect him. And so you see him initially bend that route outside, then back inside. And right there, you see the collision point. We call that the collision point. And this is a point when the DB wants to get his hands on that wide receiver, especially when they're in off coverage like you see here. And it's at that point, that's when you see, boom, that separation from Keon Coleman. And this is something that shows up a bunch in his film, especially on these type of routes. It's like smash concept, sail type concept to the wide side field. You see this a bunch, and you see him create that separation time and time again.
So what's nice on this one, the very first time I saw it, I was like, oh, he's just chucking, running the dude by. And I ended up like zooming in like crazy and then going in slow-mo. What he does, that slot corner gets his outside hand and arm onto Keon here. And what Keon does is he chucks him a little, but he chops down on that inside arm. And that's what throws that corner by. You can see the reason he's got now his inside arm is all the way over his body, and his inside one is, or outside one is now underneath him. That's because Keon chopped it, chucked him, and got clear. And this is the way that he wins and separates at that spot. It's not because this, man, what a clean break and, the deception that he sold in this route, although he does have some, but he's not winning with nuance and refinement and polish. Like when he's separating at the catch point, it's because he's using that length, that size, that strength, and moments like this where he's able to kind of chuck dudes aside, but also with a little bit of technicality here, feeling that arm, seeing it, sensing it, and chopping it down. I also like how he kind of hits him with that little inside out or outside inside move to get him to go upfield, then chops and cuts. So this is a nice little piece of route running here for Keon, given how he operates.
Yeah, again, they ran that a lot. And this is a play we broke down a few weeks ago when we did the comp show one-on-one. And this is something that you saw a lot of, not just at Florida State, but also at Michigan State, that one-on-one ability. It's something we talked about a little while ago. The Bills at times felt like they just threw a lot outside the numbers. And so bringing these condensed formation and these, heavy looks, getting everyone in the box and getting your one-on-one look to the top of the screen with Coleman, that's, if you have 3 plays, I don't mind them trying this once. You know what I mean? Yeah. I don't want it to be on just third down each and every week, obviously. But in these type of situations, especially in the red zone, this is why you draft a guy, because of the ability to create that separation at the top of the break right there. And then again, pivot, use that basketball background to pivot to the boundary and create that separation with his hands at the catch point as well.
Yeah, you can see the basketball background here on this one. Just the understanding of leverage, of body positioning, kind of looks like he's trying to make space for himself down low in the paint, like making himself available for a point guard to like dump it down low to him. Another just really good
Right
catch.
there.
Like, look at where the DB's hand is, like in between going for that punch out, trying to rip and pull down at the ball or Keon's hands. Keon catches it with those big, strong mitts that he has and does not let that ball get ripped out. Similar to the catch we saw against LSU that we showed.
Yeah.
Just look at the corner's hand is on that ball the
Yep.
whole time. And Keon's like, fine, like I'll catch the ball and catch your hand too, like while I'm at it, like you're not getting away from me. And this is a nice like schematic piece that you were talking about here, just a potential easy button option. When you get into the low red zone, you have the threat of Josh Allen running the ball in addition to the regular Bills run game, which works. But now if this can be another easy button option for you where you have a ball winner who can function like this in the low red zone, yeah, this kind of makes it a nice little damned if you do, damned if you don't option for the defense versus the Bills offense in these scenarios.
Yeah, and someone, Sarah goes, maybe Megatron's looking pretty good. Someone posted that in our YouTube channel that if he hits his ceiling, he may be Megatron, and there someone else responded with, that's actually a really good nickname. I was cracking up when I saw that, and so and
Yeah,
Sarah
no one's
brought
ever
it
had
to our
it.
chat now. So here's one against LSU. Obviously, really good competition. Slot fade, top of the screen. Again, watch that concentration and that strength towards the end zone here, right at the goal line. And this, again, it's tight coverage. You see him running a slot fade. It's tight coverage. But what does he do? He creates separation with his length, with his frame, and creating separation at the catch point, and then the catch radius right there, and strength at the catch point to bring it in. So again, it's just a different type of separation. And it's one that I would say overall, the Bills really haven't had in the offense. And we saw some of it with Kincaid last year, but now having this type of ability on the boundary is nice. Even though I gave the Bills flack for drafting a guy like this because I don't think he meshes quite well with Allen. But I will admit that having this on the boundary to bail a quarterback out from time to time it's a good asset and weapon to have.
Absolutely. And that's why I wanted it like in addition to Stephon Diggs and Dalton Kincaid and these other
Yeah.
pieces. Like it's
Right.
a nice option to have, another, thing to order off of the menu. I don't know if I want it as my main course on the menu,
Mm-hmm.
but I like it as an appetizer or as a side that I can put to the main course. And yeah, this one, we showed this when we did the comp episode several weeks ago. Like this one is just nuts. And this is a nice piece, little slot fade action. And again, similar to the play we showed just prior against Miami, DB, this one's even wilder. Like DB has his hands right through Keon Coleman's and even tries to like rip.
Perfect
Yeah,
technique up through the pocket.
absolutely. Absolutely. Like he's watching, eyes on the ball, punching through the pocket, punching through those hands. And he even gets his hand
Yeah.
on the ball and on the arm of Keon Coleman. And Coleman still wrangles it, brings it down. He's catching it while catching the DB's arm. Similar to the previous clip where he's like, cool, I'll catch your hand with the ball. He recatches this and locks that DB's arm into it at the same time. Like the grip strength, the hands. And you saw some of this in the combine at that gauntlet drill. Like when the ball touched his hands, it was just no movement. It just hits those mitts. It's like it's just nice and secure and snug when the ball hits his hands here. And this one's a little nicer than that Miami one because it's, he goes up and gets this one. There's a little more of that ball winning aspect to it instead of just positioning and leverage, which is nice. I think this one gives people a little look into like, okay, he can go up and maybe dunk on someone and kind of win the ball and play above the rim on this one.
And I bring up Johnny Mac's comments here. He says, no more excuses for Josh. I guess Josh needs to get his shit together then. And this kind of brings me back to something I was thinking about earlier today. And, Bean came out and was pretty forthright about Coleman being young and how they're going to have to rely on him, which they said that, in the beginning of the offseason, how they're going to have to rely on younger guys to play and play big roles because of that, the reset with their roster. And this comment by Johnny, it kind of brings me back to, you heard a lot of speculation and rumors and things about Josh Allen and his lack of offseason work and lack of accountability in some situations in games over the last few years, the stuff that we talked about here in the film room. And so for Bean to come out and say that and put that pressure on Coleman, that's one thing. But I wonder if he's actually doing that for Josh, not to kind of hold him accountable, not to just say, okay, you picked this guy. This is the receiver you picked, which again, that story is kind of blown up a little too much. But I wonder if they're doing that and saying that to put the onus on Josh and say, you know what, there are no more excuses. This is a guy that you had high hopes for, that one of 5 guys or 5 receivers that we showed you that we may pick, and you told us this information and why it would help you having a guy like that. Maybe that's why why Bean did that, and why, he came out and said, okay, you know, Josh said Coleman's his guy and all that stuff, like that whole story. Maybe it's for Josh more so than, getting the confidence of Coleman up in the draft and all the hoopla that came with the draft. Maybe it
Mhm.
was for the accountability of Josh.
Could be. And we've talked about it a bit on this show, and I'll bring up the comment from RJ who says excuses for Josh. Dude should have been MVP last year. Laughing emoji. Still somehow needs to get better though. You look
Yeah.
at his mechanics, his decision making, the sloppiness that he executed at times. We broke a lot of it down on this show, and a lot of
Yeah.
things that mainstream wise was getting blamed on Gabe Davis or Stephon Diggs or some other guys. Some of it was due to Allen because of poor reads or
Right.
processing or just poor mechanics with his footwork or his arm. And good comment there. Maybe it
Yeah.
was both. It
It
goes
definitely
both
is.
ways,
Yeah.
100%. But I think and it's understandable, right? Like you have the franchise quarterback. He is the golden boy. People don't want to put blame on that guy, but he's not blameless. He's not faultless. I wouldn't have given him the MVP last year because of how much we watched film and all the mistakes that he was making. I'm always going to go back to that levels concept against Cincinnati, where he's just at that time not hitting hot routes and not doing all this stuff that he was kind of having errors with. But I like that idea of, especially if there was tension, backstage in the locker room between Diggs and Allen. Like if Diggs
There
goes,
was some kind of friction there. Like
yes,
we've
absolutely.
chronicled that. There definitely was.
And this is even more so too, like not them saying like no more excuses, but maybe just, hey man, like the onus is on you. Like
Yeah.
take everybody as far as you can get them and do what you need to do to get everybody to that spot. Like get back
It's
to your
just funny
stuff.
because now we're like, again, the last couple of years we've talked about how before it became a big story of like, Josh, how come we're not seeing his workouts anymore? How come he's not throwing? He's doing golf, but he's not, like, that was always kind of like in the underbelly of a successful season or two the last 2
Yes.
years. But it's funny because now like all of that's being chronicled and all of that's being talked about. And now we're hearing, oh yeah, Josh has got all these guys throwing him and Kincaid. Like it's almost like an overcompensation. And it's become the Coleman story and him being the selection for Josh and all that kind of was, again, overblown. And I think everyone in the party knew that, like, oh yeah, Coleman was his guy. Like it was too much of a company line. I didn't buy it. I bought it last year for Dalton Kincaid, and you're not getting me again this year. Like you get that leeway, but
There's
it just seems so over the top.
There's a certain point where too much smoke makes me
Yeah,
think there's no fire. Like I'm
right.
not buying it. Like everybody's giving the same kind of cookie cutter answer, and they're all saying the same. No, like even like the guy who like snow blows at One Bills Drive is like, yeah, Josh loves Keon. Like that's who we wanted. And I'm like, you don't know. Like I'm not doing this.
No, and then anytime we post anything negative about Keon, it's like, well, I trust Josh Allen over you. I'm like,
exactly.
Okay,
All right, cool.
There's no way to win.
All right. Yeah, it makes you not want to even say anything.
Back to the film. All right. And one thing that has come up with him and Coleman and the conversation about his inability to separate is, he's going to be a big slot. His best role is a big slot, which is just a way of saying he should be a quasi tight end. No, he's way more talented than that and has way more athleticism than that. On this play, I like the concentration. So he's in the slot. He's that big slot, that power slot, right? Bottom of the screen. And you can see him work that route outside just a little bit right here. As this DB flashes and spins to the back half, you're going to see him bend it outside and then boom, gets inside. Now he sees that this guy's getting on his hip. He has a good angle on him, but he's still able to reel this pass in over the middle. And it's something that brings me back to, that Chiefs game when they were doubling Diggs and all that. And you saw Gabe Davis go off. What happened? You saw a lot of these too high sets, and you could use Coleman like that in the middle of the field. You can use him like they did Gabe Davis when they saw that cover zero look and Josh just chucked it up over the middle. Gabe brought it down for the touchdown. Like you can do that with him. I don't think he's going to be a power slot at the next level. I think he can play boundary just fine. He'll have a certain role. He'll have a role of a boundary receiver. Maybe he can't do everything that an X can, but he'll have a really nice role as a boundary receiver, but also have the ability to bump inside from time to time.
Yeah, I see him more as the boundary as an X guy, but I like the idea of kicking him into the slot like this just because of that size matchup. Similar to Kincaid, right? Like you put him in the slot and it's like, okay, are you going to put your nickel guy there? Are you going to bring your outside corner? Can your outside corner function in the slot? Is it going to be, a linebacker or a safety? Like the questions that you make a defense have to answer in relation to size and frame and speed and coverage ability. It's nice. This is a wild catch. Like he has to look around that nickel corner and he peeks. And this is where that size and frame helps, right? Because he can see over that smaller defender. He can get eyes on the ball. I also like his celebrations. Like they're not too overstated. They're just subtle. They're nice. Really nice catches. He's going to the ground. And like you highlighted, like the stem work there, those are the little glimpses. Again, it's more glimpses, but it's those little subtleties that I like where he shows that he can work a defender and make them turn the opposite way that he's going. He can sell them a little bit of something else when he's actually doing the opposite. And that's what encourages me a little bit. Now, more needs to come in addition to precision and the movement and hopefully some more sharpness or suddenness to his routes, which isn't present right now. But it's these little hopes, that you see that are encouraging in addition to just the ball winning aspect and then absolute monster.
Speaking of ball winning, right? I mean, good Lord.
Ricky Pearsall made that one catch earlier in the year before this game against Charlotte. And I was like, there's no catch in the world that is ever going to top that. And then Keon Coleman made this catch. And I'm still in awe watching it. Like this catch is nuts.
Yeah, it's crazy. And one that, especially with the last one too, you guys have to understand as well, much like, speed and time speed and play speed and, creating separation, these contested catches that you're seeing down the field, they also can happen at the short area, in the intermediate area. And this is also, a contested catch. You're going to see him, break to the post there. That guy spins out. And right at the catch point, it's contested. And obviously the ball was already by him. It was already by him, but he's able to, again, use his frame, his basketball background to jump up and one hand and catch this, but also absorb the hit. He absorbs the hit from that defender. And you can see it barely knocks him over. And he's able to reel that in with his wingspan and length, and just a really nice play down the field by Coleman. Size,
frame, jumping ability, length, wingspan, the hands, like just all of it comes through on that play. And it's still one of the best catches of the year. It's between like this one and the Ricky Pearsall catch for catch of the year, like in college football, hands down. And I love that you mentioned too, like how he plays through the contact, like he barely even moves when that defender hits him. And that's also probably going to happen a bit in the NFL.
It's very much basketball like too, right?
Absolutely. You're being able to go up for the board and take the ball off the glass and not being pushed out of position or not getting moved. Like that's where that basketball background comes in again.
All right. And so here's a clip from this past season as well against Clemson. And this is where, that conversation of speed versus play speed, you can see he's just running a go route and there's no separation there. And that ball was, thrown out in front of him so that he could run under it. Again, something that Josh struggled with last year, whether he was thrown to Diggs or Davis or any of those vertical threats. So this play, time speed, well, yeah, he's not that fast. He's not going to run by a guy. He doesn't have a 50-50 throw, so he can't create that separation at the catch point. So, you will see this from time to time, especially corners that can just turn and run. There was really no threat or panic from that DB because of the lack of long speed from him. But now, later in that game, what happens on this play? You're going to see it right on the fringe of the red zone. Again, look at the formation. Are these two tight ends right here? I think there's two tight ends right there. Crazy. You're bringing these guys into the box, single high safety. You think the Bills want to run some of this? Tight formation, condensed formation. You get a separation at the catch point, one-on-one with Coleman on a 50-50 ball, one that was placed much better. And Anthony, you see Coleman bring it in, snatch it out of the air, and then protect it away. You see the separation right there as the ball's dropping in. Catch it, and then turn his back to that guy to protect the ball for the touchdown.
And this one's nice too. This one came in overtime against Clemson. This effectively won the game for Florida State. And, again, ball winning, like you highlighted everything. I just want to highlight, again, like you said, like the schematic component of it, like the 12 personnel aspect and the defense in a single high look. This is something that the Bills regularly could see, especially if their ground game continues to work under Joe Brady like it did last year. Heavier personnel or just the presence of the run in general. And you highlight everybody there.
Yeah.
Coleman, number 5, last guy there, one-on-one situation, safety in that single high alignment. He's going over the top once he sees Travis starting to go, but
you're sending the 12 personnel, looks like a run formation, condensed set. They're still sending 5 into a route. This is something that teams do, guys. You can still be a spread type offense and run spread type concepts from heavy personnel groupings. That's how you create mismatches. That's how you get everyone in the box thinking you're going to run. That's how you get a single high look and you get that one-on-one look on the fringe of the red zone for Coleman.
And it's more of a power spread type of
Yeah.
option. And the Bills can
Right.
do that because you've got this, dual, citizenship for Kincaid and Dawson Knox. And, you could run it with Cook or you could leak him out of the backfield. Same thing for Ty Johnson and or Ray Davis. And then you've got Keon Coleman, who, if you've got that true one-on-one on the outside, put the ball over his outside shoulder, let him go up, let him get it. Another similar, like dunking on dudes, just kind of playing above the rim catch from Keon Coleman. And that's a beautiful still shot. Like you see it right there on his fingertips, right
Yeah.
there on his hands. He goes up, reaches, brings it in. This is what you're drafting him for, this type of ability. And just to go back to the previous clip that you mentioned, like you saw in that game when he was matched up against Nate Wiggins, the corner from Clemson who went to Baltimore in the first round, who can fly, ran a 4.28. You could see the lack of the lack of fear in Nate
Right.
Wiggins when Coleman was trying to press him vertically. He was just like, no, like, I don't care. But then when Coleman would get in his kitchen and try and play physical with him a bit, that's where he would start to win. And now we go to some of the Michigan State tape, which is like, if you're talking just from a highlight perspective, in Michigan State tape, aside from that catch against Syracuse, his Michigan State tape might be even better than the Florida State tape.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And this is one of those plays, again, a go route. You're getting a single high safety look. But watch how the release is much better. And that's an area I do think he needs to get better. I think Bean overstated that and really kind of hyped him up. And
His
he's seen
release ability.
his release
Yeah.
ability, because he got jammed up a lot of times against very good corners at the line of scrimmage.
And especially considering
Impressed.
how, like, he's usually got the size advantage, I found that a little disappointing. Even in the going up against Banks and this year against Maryland, like, he won some, lost some, but he struggled in ways that, again, it was his second year and Banks was a legit dude that year. But you'd like to see him use that size a little bit more if he's not going to have that sharpness and that suddenness or deception in that release.
Right. So watch this release compared to some of the other ones. You see him kind of stack outside right there and then get that inside lane right there in the corner and gets onto his hip immediately. But you're going to see him work through that and stack that defender very quickly. But again, there's not that long speed separation. But again, he separates at the catch point. He's able to kind of shield and slow down a little bit so that that defender has to work through him or is not able to work through him. He's able to bring that pass in and then get down before the big hit from the post safety.
Yeah, again, another good feel for the defender, the feel for the spacing, the feel for the leverage. And despite the fact that we're all showing this like as a positive, again, though, like this is a hard way to live consistently. Like
Yes.
these are hard catches to make. Like we're showing them and they're highlight reel worthy. And it's like, oh my God, what an amazing catch from Keon Coleman. This is hard. Even from the quarterback perspective, you got to get in there and get it far enough away from the outstretched hand of the corner, but not too far that the safety can make a play on top. And again, this is a hard catch, but it's beautiful. That corner number one, he's got his arm in there on the shoulder, trying to punch through the pocket, rip through the ball, or rip the hand away. And you see the ball tracking, the eyes, the concentration, and the hands of Keon Coleman, and then the body control to get it and get down. Like that's a beautiful rep, but it's, again, a hard way to live. And it's because he doesn't have that speed to pull away once he finally stacks the corner.
Yeah, I think we're both in agreement that overall we prefer wide receivers that separate, especially early separators with speed, with quickness, with suddenness, or route running. And I do think some of those areas we do need to see improve from Coleman. So I want to show some of the short area play speed and speed. And this is one of those plays. They're going to run a bubble, and he's just going to catch it here. And this doesn't. If you're just watching this, you're like, okay, that was kind of cool. That was a really nice, first down gain, but a lot goes into this little screen, and this is where you get to see some of the processing and play speed take account here. So obviously it's a play that the Bills have run a lot. They run an RPO, they have a run called, and then kind of like a pass tag, a screen out here. They ran it with Shakir, they ran it with Diggs. It was up and down last year, and people got sick of it, to be honest. But watch how he adjusts to this throw. And again, throws like this typically have to be missiles, especially if you're talking from Josh Allen. They're going to have velocity on it. Look at him adjust to this throw. And as he's midair, he's looking upfield and he sees that this defender is taking kind of an outside angle to him. And he's also probably getting a good look peripheral wise on that defender. That's where pursuit really shuts down screens inside out. But watch him process all of this. This is that playing faster, that time speed and time suddenness in conjunction with processing, mental processing. And boom, it immediately explodes vertically, makes a couple guys miss. And he took that play that, again, was a run call, but because of the leverage outside, a hat on a hat, on 3rd and 1, the quarterback threw it out wide, and he was able to get a nice chunk on 3rd and short.
This was the one that really I wanted to put out earlier in the draft process because it was, oh, he's unathletic, he's unathletic. This is good athleticism on this play.
Mhm.
This one honestly looks a little bit like, hey, this is why Florida State has Keon Coleman returning punts because
Yes.
of movement and vision like this. And you hit the big one for me. I love as he's caught the ball. First of all, he has to go up and get it. So he goes up and gets it. And as he comes down to the ground, like you said, he's got the peripherals. He's eyeing that apex coming through. It's the burst, it's that explosion upfield where he's able to split the block and that apex defender closing down. And then because he has the size and frame, all that defender can do is get an arm on Coleman and it's an easy broken tackle. And then he puts his foot in the ground and then he cuts back and then he gets upfield. Like you see some vision, you see some
Mhm.
athleticism, you see the catch radius, the frame. These are those examples of he's athletic. Like he's not a plotter. He's not, Gabe Davis in this regard or Kelvin Benjamin. Like you see the athleticism play in these short area pieces. And again, goes back to why he was able to play Michigan State basketball for Tom Izzo and why he was able to return punts because he has that athleticism in addition to the size and frame and ball winning pieces.
All right. So to kind of wrap up this segment, so I want to ask you, what's his role going to be next year? Starter, role player, depth player? What do you see him, how do you see him contributing in year one in the Bills offense?
I think from a snap share perspective, it'll end up going into like starter, but I see him more as like a role player. I think this offense is going to funnel through Dalton Kincaid in terms of target share and being the guy. And then between Curtis Samuel, Khalil Shakir, and Keon Coleman, each have little different buckets and kind of areas that they play to in that basketball lineup at wide receiver. So I think from a snap share perspective, it'll be starter, but I see him more as a role player, especially early on, just given where he is with his skill set, where his strengths are, where his areas of opportunity are, and then maybe potentially building on that, we see some more legitimate, like high wide receiver 2, wide receiver 1 stuff as we get into year 2, year 3, and year 4.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And for the most part, that's really how, this regime has, kind of,
Mm,
preferred to bring their guys along, especially if you're talking about this guy's age and playing in again the offense that he played at Michigan State,
yeah.
then Florida State, and then obviously coming here. I think early on, I do think they'll use him in a lot of the X roles. If they're in a 3-by-1, he's going to be on the solo side by
Yeah.
himself. If there's a shot play, they're going to have him in there. He's going to probably get a lot of snaps primarily because of what he can do as a run
The,
blocker.
the Gabe Davis role, like tight to the
Yeah,
formation, condensed,
he's
block in, digging dudes out.
yeah, I do think he will get a lot of snaps and um how many targets he gets. You always talk about, a lot of people talk about reception rate, catch rate. It's not something we really like, but guys like Gabe Davis had low reception rates because they had a lot of snaps and in especially in the run and pass game. But I think he'll play a lot of the roles that an X is asked of
Mm.
in this offense. I do think he'll start off as a role player, but I don't think they're going to put as much on his plate as they did, say, a Gabe Davis or a Khalil Shakir, where they're going to ask him to learn multiple spots. I think they'll be able to set him in the X spot
Mm.
and have him focus on that because he is so young and because the offense at Florida State was pretty vanilla and they didn't ask much of him, especially if you're talking about read and leverage routes and
Mm.
changing option routes and those type of things. He did more of that at Michigan State, on his own account. He admitted that, but I think he'll start off as a role player and then they'll again kind of bring him along. But I do expect him to get some really, high leverage looks in third and fourth down situations in the red zone. So I do think he'll play a big part. So to initially start off, I do agree that he's probably going to be a role player, but I won't be surprised, much like Dalton Kincaid last year, if he ends up, earning that starting role, mid season or so back third of the season going forward.